the ALCO to meet and take a decision. But as I said again, it is an easing cycle, and therefore there will be a tendency to pass on rate cuts. However, how much we do it and when we do it is still something that the ALCO has to decide.
Okay, Taimur, what is your sense in terms of, what came out from the RBI policy this time, especially with the chances of future cuts going forward?
I think the statement is very clear. RBI is done. It now has thrown the gauntlet to the banks. It wants the banks to cut rates and accommodate whatever easing has taken place so far. But I will second-guess the RBI. My argument would be, while I hear the RBI loud and clear that they're done, they're worried about inflation, but I think that they will be wrong on two counts. They will be wrong with respect to their worry about fuel price. We think that global commodity prices, whatever rebound that we have seen, it's over. It's going to flatten out from here onward, and they don't have to worry too much about that pass-through. Secondly, I think that the RBI's justified worries about the monsoon, I think, will also again prove to be wrong, hopefully, and primarily because we have seen in our own study in the last 10-15 years, the years when the government has been very good at managing the supply side with respect to food grains disbursement, we haven't seen a pickup in food inflation even when you had a bad monsoon. So I don't know what the monsoon will be, but I am fairly confident this government will be very proactive in heading off that food price pressure. So on those two criteria, the things that is making the RBI right now fairly cautious will be reasons that the RBI would be able to relax 2 months from now. So I would expect one more rate cut, although I read from the statement they don't want to cut anymore.
Okay, so you would expect it to the tune of 25 basis points, possibly post the August 4th policy, which is the next time the RBI will meet?
That's right.
Okay, all right.
That's right. So August 4 would have to be the earliest, yeah.
Okay, Mrs. Bhattacharya, just coming back to you with regards to one of the things that was brought up was bank recapitalization or bank capitalization during the governor's speech, where he mentioned that that is maybe a requirement. It could be something which the government could support, or, the banks could tap into the markets as well. What is your sense? Do you think that the government can do more in terms of capitalization of banks in order to support them, the smaller ones, which don't fit the criteria which is set out in terms of performance?
Yes, definitely so. But, if you remember what the governor said, he very clearly said that none of the banks need capital just as of now, and that most of the banks will need this capital in order to fund the growth. So therefore, what we are looking for is growth capital. I have a belief that, as the economy revs up, there will be more confidence, and therefore the banks will be in a position to raise money, not only from the government, but also from the markets.
Okay. Mr. Dhawan, coming to you then, what is your sense in terms of passing on this 25 basis points, or the likelihood of how much could be passed on, because 75 basis points is what we've got in terms of total repo rate cuts, but the system has only passed on around 25 basis points. How much more, whenever that happens, could we see in terms of lending rate cuts, and by when?
I think what has happened is one of the things that you have to see is that despite so much of repo rate cuts, the market has not reacted very much. The 10-year yields are pretty much where they were in the morning, despite a 25 basis point cut. So, therefore, I do feel that we'll have, going forward in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have to see where the market finally settled. We are definitely into an easing cycle. Demand for credit remains weak. We'll watch the market for 2 or 3 weeks. Going forward, I do believe that there would be some rate cuts in store for us.
Okay. Anand, we've barely seen a reaction on the yield, but we've seen a stark reaction on the bank nifty. Your sense in terms of the policy?
I think the policy kind of instills some of the worst fears amongst market participants. If you notice, he's essentially done two things. One is he has increased the inflation estimate to 6%, and he's brought down the growth estimate. Now, the combination of that, as Rashesh was mentioning earlier, is frankly not good news at all for the market. As far as bond markets are concerned, the other thing it implies, if the RBI expects 6% inflation by Jan 2016, and given they've indicated a corridor of 1.5% to 2% for real interest rates, frankly, at 7.25% repo rate, the market is already on borrowed time and is probably getting a favor from the RBI at this particular level. So both these aren't good news, which is why the market has completely ignored the 25 basis points rate cut and is looking at the way forward. I guess the market is looking at a long pause for some time to come.
Okay, well, we have Lata joining in from the RBI headquarters. Lata, over to you.
Thanks, Ekta. Not that I know any better. I heard the same press conference that you did. But Mrs. Bhattacharya, to start with you, there was a very strong message that rate cuts need to be passed down further. The governor made an example of his own deposits earning him only 8%, whereas lending rates are at, just 15 basis points lower than where they were. So is the stage set for a little more of lending rate cuts?
Yes, I would think that the stage is set for a little more of lending rate cuts. But having said that, Lata, we were just looking at some figures. Since the time, say about a year and a half back, the amount that has been added to our reserves is around $76.2 billion. So that would mean around 4.8 lakh crores getting into the system. However, if you look at the money growth has actually been only 3.6 lakh crores. Today, the M3 growth is around 11.3. And as such, there is not over much of liquidity. More of liquidity would also enable better transmission of rate cuts. Taking everything into consideration, while we do see that the growth is down, but we have to understand that interest rate cuts are not the only way of pumping up growth. Having said that, again, I must admit that with inflation down, with 75 basis points cut in the repo, banks will look at cutting rates. Again, how much and when is, of course, a call that individual banks will have to take. But hopefully, as we see a little bit more of the credit growth coming in, it will make it much easier for the banks to pass on the rate cuts.
Okay, if you can just give me an idea whether the cost of funds for banks also is likely to fall. I mean, can you all lower deposits even below 8% so that, there is a possibility of keeping margins and still passing on more lending rates? Is that possibility also there? And should we expect it, in a month?
I would think that is the best way to go. I would think that's the best way to go, but if you look at the cost of deposits, we have the lowest costs of deposits at 8%, but the rest of the market is still sitting at 8.5%. Everybody needs to come down. The reason why this is proving to be a little sticky is because the small savings schemes of the government, they are at much higher rates. In fact, if you look at the Sukanya Samriddhi scheme that has been brought about, there the rates are as high as 9.2%. So if banks are competing from the same kitty of deposits, then it does become very difficult for the banks to lower rates to a very great extent, because then obviously they will lose out. But having said that, on account of the fact that the real rate of interest is now ahead of, I think, 1.25%, therefore there is definitely a case for banks to bring down rates.
Okay, so would it be another 15 basis, or this time could it be 25? Because you have a cumulative 75.
This is something that I really don't think I can answer right at this point of time. Okay. I know you all try and get me to commit on this on TV, but really I can't do it.
No. Fair enough, ma'am. Let me get the other participants in as well. Taimur, what have been your key takeaways? No more cuts. Do you buy the 6% inflation? Do you think they will undershoot it?
Right, Lata, first of all, nice try. You really tried to get Ms. Bhattacharya to commit. Look, I think, as I said earlier, we are not living in a world of high inflation risk. I mean, this is a general statement for the whole world. I mean, many parts of Asia, where I'm sitting in Singapore, all the way to China and beyond, the risk is deflation, not inflation. India has its own domestic idiosyncratic factors, monsoon, pass-through of fuel price, and so on. But my view is that in a few months' time, we'll be pleasantly surprised by developments on those areas. We have seen pump prices go up, but I think we have seen just about as much as they're going to go up. If anything going forward, pump prices will decline again as oil stabilizes. On the food side, I think that this government's proactive supply-side measures will keep food prices under the lid, even if monsoons were to be poor, and monsoons may not be poor. I mean, all the IMD has done so far is postpone the beginning of monsoon estimate by a week. That's nothing in terms of margin of error. So I appreciate the RBI's caution, but I think there is room for inflation to actually surprise us on the positive side. And I also think that the RBI will react to that development by cutting rates again. But I agree that reading the statement, the RBI doesn't want to cut anymore, given how worried it is. I'm just second-guessing that call right now.